Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Vincent Van Dyke, an Emmy Award winner and 12-time Emmy Award nominee, whose latest project is the HBO limited series, The Sympathizer. Vincent, I love this show so much. You have these four iconic, or immediately iconic Robert Downey Jr. characters. They're all wildly different. It's such a huge swing. I guess I just want to know, when you were first approached with this, what was your thoughts, and what were your kind of takeaways on the whole thing?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Chris. Yeah, it's a super daunting task. I met Robert briefly on another project that inevitably didn't happen. But when we met, we kind of hit it off, and he chatted with me about a potential job that was coming up, and started kind of picking my brain about certain elements of it. And before I know it, I think it was like 2 days later, we had producers reaching out to us to sign us on to the project. So I was like, okay, I guess we're all in, and we're doing this thing. And luckily, we had that session because we had to really hit the ground running. It was a quick turnaround to start creating and designing these looks, and get them in front of everyone's eyes. It's daunting in the sense that we know that he's working often. We know that he's kind of jumping between characters on occasion. So his time is super valuable. And of course, we can't have him in the chair for too long. So that was a bit of a leading force here to make sure that what it is that we make isn't going to take 4 hours in the chair every day. So that's something that we're taking into consideration, and then also trying to make these characters these unique individuals that you speak of. Right, we're trying to really have these individual silhouettes and these iconic, recognizable characters that are being released to everyone for the first time, to have as this kind of bellwether idea of what they are, these archetypes, right? So it's daunting, especially knowing that at some point in episode three, they're all playing against each other, and that's something that just adds a level of difficulty to a situation like this, where one can work really well on its own, but all of a sudden when you're comparing a character on somebody that is subtle, that is very kind of grounded and real, along with these others that you've just done, that's where it can kind of fall apart. So that was definitely a very challenging element to this as well, but a ton of fun, and I really had a blast doing it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely you reached the challenge accepted, or challenge succeeded, right? Because it is incredible work, and especially in that episode, like you're saying, you have to have all of these guys have to look real and different, and all these different things. And I think that it's just incredible. I kind of just wanted to go through, obviously we meet Claude first, I believe, right?
Hmm.
The CIA operative.
Yeah.
And it is a great, it's again, I think he looks so different. I think I read on interviews with Hua, where he was like, "Oh, I think that was maybe the first character he maybe interacted with," and Robert, people didn't even recognize that it was Robert, right, coming on set as Claude. So I guess that's a pretty nice endorsement, I guess, of your work. But I guess how did you kind of land on how he would look, and the hair and the eyes and everything could make it look so different? I think than obviously what we know Robert looks like.
Yeah, it's interesting because this process was far more collaborative, and we really explored a lot more than what we normally might. Meaning, we often have a picture of something that we're trying to hit with the work that we do, where it's like, hey, this is the concept, or this is what we want this to be, and it's a little bit more like clear line in the sand of, okay, that's where we need to be. Don't step over it. With this, there really wasn't that. It was a very loose conversation with myself and Robert and Director Park of kind of what some of these concepts would be, and so it allowed for much more input, both from Robert and director, to just throw ideas out and say, well, what if we did this? What if we did that? Can we try this? So the idea of play here was pretty huge. I didn't really start with concept work like we normally would. For this, I just felt like it was better to just dive in and start the sculpting process. So we had these heads of Robert laid out. My studio created the plaster heads of him that are painted the same color as the clay that we use. It's kind of this brown orangish color, and I'm able to then take this oil-based clay and start sculpting on there, and just find the stuff that feels like it works. So trying different things with his nose, his ears, aging him, widening certain things, trying to narrow certain things, and then loosely sculpting in hair to get that overall silhouette of what that might look like. Facial hair, eyebrows, earlobes. There are all of these things for us to play with. And actually, at one point, I even took a head and just threw the kitchen sink at it and just did a whole bunch of different little things that we just had as options that we'd go, well, if this isn't working, maybe we pull the nose from this and we try that, Mr. Potato Head style. But without having that concept work, it really meant that I just had a bunch of heads that have clay on them that are essentially what I think each character should look like. And then we have to go through notes and really find out, where we've landed. And it was at that point that I felt it was best, because of the time constraints that we had, was just to invite everybody over to the studio. And so we had, showrunners and producers and director Park and Robert all at my studio, just looking at these heads lined up, so they could weigh in live and literally say, why don't we make this nose a little bit bigger? Why don't we try a goatee here? Why don't we try to, age him a little further here? And I was just sculpting live right then and there, just making these changes. And this was selfish for me, because I just wanted to get that approval as quickly as I possibly could. And then once we had that, we were able to hit the ground running to create the prosthetics for each of these characters, generate them in silicone, the appliances, the hair pieces, everything, get all that prepared so that we could jump into these test makeups and then see, of course, Robert bring them to life. Because at this point, I have no idea what Robert's bringing to each of these characters. We're just looking at this from a visual perspective. And then from there, obviously, he's going to, really emote through these and show me where maybe I need to kind of redirect or change course a little to align with what he's bringing to the table.
You obviously have done, like you said, like 12 Emmy nominations. You've done like a lot of incredible work here in your career, and worked with so many actors, obviously, too. I wanted to ask, like, obviously acting, he's doing so much with his face and stuff and putting the makeup on. I mean, I would imagine it's like, you have to get it to a level where it's like, they don't even, like, he doesn't even realize he's wearing the makeup, right? Or like that kind of thing. And like, how do you kind of do that to make it so it looks like we see in the show, or it looks real, but it's not going to be like an impediment to what he's trying to do as an actor?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, that's our goal across the board. So whether I'm covering somebody completely and you can't see any of them, or you're covering somebody in a lot of small, subtle pieces like we are with Robert here, the idea is that it becomes a second skin that you just don't even, notice you have on. I mean, that's our goal, even with that full coverage idea. I mean, I think oftentimes an actor might be afraid of the idea of prosthetics because they don't want to feel like they're in a mask, or they don't want to feel like they're going to, kind of have their performance impaired at all. And these are valid concerns, with teeth. There's so many things, contact lenses. There's a lot going on here with Robert. He was game for all of it. He really was like, let's do it. Let's explore it. It's really true, like through and through acting at its core, character driven. Like, let's find these little nuances that help not only visually bring this character to life, but help Robert start to find that character as well. Because I think a lot of the little things that we were trying were inspiring what he was bringing out in these characters. So yeah, that's the goal, is that it falls away for them and they are able to just do their thing. And there are certain things they can lean into, but I want to be as invisible as possible. I mean, that's really my goal as a prosthetic designer, is to create things that you forget are there and you're just immersed in story. And there's nothing that's distracting you. You've just accepted what you're looking at as reality. Whether it's the Ghoul with Walt Goggins or whatever it might be. We're just letting everything kind of just fall away, and you're just in it. You're in that world.
Right. I want to ask you. I love that you brought up the Ghoul too, because that's incredible work that you also did as well. But in Sympathizer, I guess the two other, like, so we have the Claude, like I mentioned, Professor Hammer, which is another outrageous character, I would say, that Robert has created, and that looks great.
Yeah.
And then you have Ned, who is the congressman, and then Nikos, who's the director. And those last two, I feel like they are, I guess, again, closest to what I think Robert looks like, but obviously still different. You know what I mean? And I guess like that, I feel like, at least from my layman's perspective, I was like, those feel like almost more challenging because it isn't him, but it does look. They have to be. It's not as much of a leap, right? Like Claude and Professor Hammer are these like much bigger transformations. With those other characters, you are doing stuff obviously as well. And I was like, man, those look so different too. So I guess, like, how do you approach it when there are those like really, like in those two characters? I guess they're like very subtle, maybe changes to Robert to make him not Robert, basically.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you're right in the sense that you can see more of him, particularly I think with the director, with our kind of you know lovable but also like unbelievably awful character, right?
Yes.
I think he's coming through the most. I mean, I think one of Susan's notes for him was like, look, one of these fucking characters still needs to be sexy. So can we just have one that's attractive still? And look, that means we're going to keep Robert looking like Robert. So he is more subtle in the sense that he just has a nose prosthetic. He has some jaw pieces on either side that help kind of chisel and square off his jaw a bit. He's got a mole, and then he also has a lovely lace chest hair piece that we got a kick out of doing and applying on him. But yeah, there's a lot more of him that shines through here because, look, I think all of them to a certain degree, because we're creating these looks in a subtle way. There's a signature of Robert that's going to bleed through all of them, and we knew that from the beginning. This is something that we discussed and talked about, that we kind of want the audience to see and know and recognize. It's not like we're trying to create these masks or full coverage looks where you have no idea. And the idea is that we do know, and we're just kind of trying to figure out why. And there is some kind of theme here, and this is all still kind of being developed and explored here, and it will be. I think it'll all make more sense as the series goes on. But those were early conversations that we certainly had, in the sense that some characters might be a bit more Robert than others. So that's what he has on in terms of prosthetics. And then Congressman has got a chin and jaw piece that really kind of give him this chiseled, very particular shape to his chin and also his lower lip. He has little pieces here that we call nasolabial folds that kind of fill Robert out a touch. He has contact lenses that are almost black. They are so dark brown, which, we talked a lot about him being this kind of soulless character that just had, very little empathy. And, as we're describing this, I was like, well, we could really push those lenses so that they are, almost black, almost like he has no soul. And so we leaned into that. He was in the war and he's got this burned, hand. So he's got this little claw thing going on, which I loved that Robert brought to it. They're all so fun to develop because it is a very, very collaborative effort. It's not like, we're left to our own devices here at my studio and we're just in a bubble, just creating these things. It's play, it's literally like dress up, and we're just trying to figure out what feels right and what fits these characters.
It sounds like this is just a great experience in general, but I guess like having worked with Robert here, what maybe surprised you about his process and just what maybe you were not expecting from him?
I would say probably how little of restrictions there were. It seemed pretty open to just trying stuff. And I think that there's often this idea that it's like, hey, this is what I want it to be, and no other opinion matters. This is it. I have a clear vision. There's nothing wrong with that. But it just was not the case here. There were clear ideas and clear visuals that I think he had. But it was really open to the idea of like, well, let's throw it on the wall and see what sticks. I mean, if we explore this and we think it works, then great. And if not, then that's great too. We know what not to do. I think that was super refreshing and lovely to be involved in a creative process in that way.
Yeah, it's incredible work. I mean, the show is great, and like I said, to have these 4 distinct characters from an actor of his caliber is really impressive. And I think, and so helped by your prosthetic work. You mentioned the Ghoul before and Fallout, which I also love. I guess just quickly on that, working with Walton and stuff to get that look again, it's so distinctive. I talked to the cinematographer of that show, and he was saying how the Stuart Dryburgh, right? And he was saying how the makeup was so almost like paper thin on his face, and it really helped with his performance. And I guess just getting to talk to you, I was like, oh, what was that like to make it so it is so much, you have so much Walton coming through, I guess.
It's right. I mean, that's kind of key to my approach to things is I feel like less is more is my general rule of thumb. So no matter what we're creating, I mean, we can talk about the Robert characters, or we can talk about Ghoul. Obviously, they're very, very different in terms of coverage and what we're creating. But the approach for me is still very much the same. It's like I want to put as little rubber on somebody as I possibly can. And I think often the idea of what prosthetics mean or what they are is it's like, oh, well, you got to go through this whole thing, and it's a long process, and you're going to be covered up, and it's claustrophobic, and you can't move. And it's quite the opposite, really. I mean, the idea is that you've got these really super, super soft, sometimes tissue thin prosthetics that are transforming somebody in a really massive way. And that's the case with Walton. I mean, he's got pieces on, and he's fully covered, literally. I mean, just parts of his ears are exposed, and that's kind of it, and his eyes. But I mean, other than that, he's lips, his entire neck, his entire head, his cheeks, his forehead, his digital nose removal. He's fully covered up. Great makeup artist that we collaborated with on this in terms of the look, and also his daily application was Jake Garber. And for Robert, I would love to mention Chris Burgoyne and Mike McCash is the daily prosthetic artist for him. My job stops at a certain point. I go through test makeups, and even with Ghoul, it's like we go through test makeups and we find a balance of what works. And at some point I start to then back off, and my company then produces all the prosthetics for the run of the show. And then there's these talented hands that execute this look on a daily basis and maintain it and make it look gorgeous for the show. And there's a lot to be said about that as well. And for Ghoul, one of the things Jonah kept talking so much about is he's got to be able to be so expressive. So he's covered, but if he gives you the tiniest little raise of a brow or a little subtle squint or a curled lip, he's like, I want all this to come through. So it was really in the back of my mind and my sculptor and artists here, all of our minds as we kind of approach this to make sure that everything is very thin and that we land things in certain places that will move with talent. And this is true with Robert as well. I mean, when you design something like this, you can change a lot. But like, for example, like where this wrinkle is on me, I'm not going to put it here because it won't move with me. So if I smile, all of a sudden you get two. So we have certain landmarks and certain anatomical points that we almost want to anchor to. And then we can change a lot, but you want everything to move and get manipulated by the muscles and the anatomy of that person's face to make sure that it's driving it and it's emoting through. And I think that was really successful with Ghoul. I think that he really comes through with all of the things that everybody wanted him to be able to emote.
Yeah, it's incredible work, and like we said, the Sympathizer, amazing, and Vince Van Dyke, an Emmy winner, 12-time Emmy nominee. I would say based on these shows, maybe more in the future coming, hopefully for you. Good luck, and thank you so much for doing this. Really incredible stuff.
No, thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.